Welcome to Building What We've Learned. Today we are doing the classic Halloween tale of Dracula, so let's waste no time and get building. If you have never read the novel, you may be surprised to learn that Dracula is written as a suspense and a mystery. The fear is not in the creature of the vampire, but rather the unknown. At the time the novel was published, vampires were largely treated as mindless monsters. Much of the suspense of the book was built around the idea that the monster wasn't obvious. The story begins with a man named Jonathan traveling to Transylvania to look over a real estate transaction. The people of the town he arrives in express fear when they learn of his final destination and insist that he carries a cross with him to the castle that he will be staying at. They try to warn him of the dangers of that night, but Jonathan knows that this is probably all just superstition. The first half of this book is written as Jonathan's diary's entries while he stays at the castle. He repeatedly notes how weird and mysterious things are happening around him, but he doesn't suspect the residents of the castle to be at fault until he sees the Count acting out as a vampire. Jonathan attempts to flee that night, but he quickly learns that all the doors of the castles have been locked, and not only was the Count a vampire, but so were Dracula's 3 wives. Days pass with Jonathan being trapped within the stone walls, unable to leave. That is until he overhears Dracula's plans to board a boat for England, bringing with him 50 crates of soil. The last diary entry we have is Jonathan saying that he's going to try and make an escape attempt that night by scaling down the walls of the castle. The perspective of the book abruptly shifts to 2 young women exchanging letters. These women are Mina, the fiancée of Jonathan, and Lucy. Lucy is a young woman who fills her letters with details about how she had just had 3 different men propose to her, and while she turned down the first 2, they had all remained good friends in the end. Lucy's life seems to be going well, that is, until a ship washes ashore not far from her residence. The vessel is carrying boxes of soil, and the captain is found dead, with a note describing a tall man who drove his crew to madness. It does not take long for Lucy to fall ill after this event. The local doctor calls in a Dutchman by the name of Dr. Van Helsing. He at first presents as a goofy older man, that is until he noticed a large amount of blood that Lucy had just lost, along with 2 puncture wounds in her neck. The doctor rushes to perform a blood transfusion and warns her family that she must be looked over at night. He brings garlic flowers to Lucy and spreads them around her room. However, when night comes and Lucy's mother arrives, she insists on throwing all of them out the window and leaving it open in order for Lucy to get some fresh air after the disgusting smell. In the following days, Lucy and her mother quickly fall ill and they both later pass. At the funeral, Dr. Van Helsing fills Lucy's coffin with garlic flowers and a cross, promising that he would return to cut off her head. Before he was able to do this, however, the cross is stolen and Lucy arises as a vampire. Dr. Van Helsing meets up with Mina. Mina's fiancé Jonathan had just returned to England, and she had been taking the time to go over his diary entries that focus on his time at Dracula's castle. Together, the doctor and Mina figure out the threat that Dracula poses to England and make plans to stop him. They gather a team comprised of the men who had previously proposed to Lucy, and together they venture into the graveyard, where they discover Lucy drinking the blood of a child. They take the opportunity to kill her for good before turning their focus back to tracking down Dracula. The men decide that they do not want Mina to participate in the hunt. She is left alone, which allows Dracula the opportunity to begin drinking Mina's blood and forcing a psychic connection between them. He is going to use this to spy on the men. However, Mina quickly realizes that this connection goes both ways. She was able to spy on Dracula as well. She and the team then use this new skill to track down the vampire as he flees back to Transylvania. The novel ends with the team confronting Dracula and the 3 wives of the castle for a final fight. Dracula is defeated and the hunters are victorious. The story of Dracula continues to capture the modern audience's attention. But what may surprise you is that many people believe that Dracula was likely based off of a real person. Vlad of Transylvania was a ruthless man and the son of a warlord who belonged to the order of the Dracul, or dragon in English, thus making Vlad Draculaea, son of the dragon. Vlad's home was at constant war. When Vlad was a teenager, his father was asked to attend a diplomatic meeting with the enemy. There, Dracul and his children were captured, and Vlad and his brothers were used as hostages against their father. That is until their father mysteriously died on his way back to Transylvania. Vlad spent the next few years of his life jumping sides of the war. He briefly worked for the Turkish enemies until he returned to Transylvania and joined forces with the Hungarian king. Once he had gained a seat of power in Transylvania, he invited all the noblemen who were suspected at being involved in his father's death to a banquet, where he killed them and had their bodies impaled. Vlad spent the remainder of his life traveling the battlefields of the war and impaling his enemies on wooden spikes. At one point, Vlad was almost betrayed by the Hungarian king, but the two of them struck a deal that he would marry a member of the Hungarian royal family and convert to Christianity. While Vlad did own a castle and was later imprisoned one during the war, the castle people associate Dracula with never belonged to him. Vlad's armies passed through the area to continue on the path to war, but likely stayed at a nearby town. The fortress is now referred to as Dracula's castle due to it being the only one in the area fitting the description in the novel. It is believed that the author of the novel had limited historical knowledge of the man, and the stories of a devil-like ruler with blood and wooden spikes were likely what inspired him, rather than the history itself. What defines a vampire changes from telling to telling. In Dracula, the vampire can turn into a wolf. Modern vampires no longer burn in the sun, and the repellent of garlic flowers have been reduced to just garlic. Vlad's lifetime and the war he fought coincided with the invention of the printing press. His story was constantly changing with who he was allied with and where he was heading. While we cannot say for certain that Vlad was the sole inspiration of Dracula, it is rather fitting that the man who had his bloodthirsty battles spread across the stories and the papers continues to exist in our books. Thank you for watching. I wanted to do something special for the Halloween season, and after much debate I did settle on the classic novel, which I had never read at the time. I've never been a fan of letter-formatted books, but the almost unknowing dread that novel is actually able to capture through the diary entries and correspondence is something I don't think any other adaptation has truly managed to capture. And it's always fun learning where the modern monsters really come from. Who knows? Maybe the vampires are still out there, howling in the winds with the wolves. Happy Halloween, everyone!